Welcome, everybody, back to the podcast. Today, I'm so excited to have you all here. I am here with Damien Bohler. And Damien is somebody I've followed Damien for, I think, about a year and a half, almost a year and a half now. I
Mm.
listened to a podcast that you were in, funnily enough, a year and a half ago, and here we are. So, Damien is an intimacy geek, evolutionary pioneer, and investigator. He inquires deeply, facilitates and teaches in the worlds of authentic relating, attachment, nervous system regulation, boundaries, polarity, and so much more. I've taken part in two of Damien's courses so far, and the way he explains things is unlike anyone I've ever come across before. And it's been so helpful in my journey, like profound. So I'm so excited to have him on. Yeah,
Mm.
Damien, would you like to introduce yourself further?
Um, I think that's a pretty good summary of it. I'm sitting here smiling, like you said. I explain things in a way that you haven't heard before. That's like, oh, that's good. I like that. Um, yeah, yeah. I feel like I'm just getting started. I go through waves, like where I feel like, okay, I'm just getting started. There's a lot more that I want to offer, and I'm really feeling like a fire inside of me that's like I don't really know. I know the direction that I'm heading, but I don't always know the smaller steps in between. But I can just feel more of a fire burning around. Really, at this particular moment, intimacy and relationships seem to be very important. That's not actually my end goal or my deepest desire. I'm like more interested in how do we actually come together and live as communities in a harmonious way. And I think one of the greatest blocks we have to that is our relationships. Relationships are in turmoil and strife on the planet right now. And I think there's this big kind of overhaul and recalibration going on. And it's like, it's tricky territory to navigate. So that's really what's been fascinating me, and also from my own personal drive and desire to be in deep, intimate partnership.
Mm, thank you. I love that. That's so inspiring.
Mm.
So, I mean, typical podcast question. How did you get into this work? What's your story? How did you get
Mm.
from where you were to where you are now?
I mean, it's a long story. Kind of the cliff notes are Um, I was raised in an environment that probably already facilitated an opportunity to inquire deeply right from the beginning. My parents um, were hippies turned Buddhists, so they both have a very deep spiritual practice. My father has always been going off to do retreats, and I grew up being taken to like the Australian version of monasteries. So, they're usually just houses, but they're doing like Tibetan rituals and, chanting and everything. So that was kind of very much my world from early on. So I think I was raised in a non-ordinary environment, non-conventional environment in a way. So that I'm not Buddhist. I didn't really follow that path, but the kind of Buddhist philosophy really informs me. Um, and then, I've just been inquiring and investigating ever since then into spirituality, into anything that kind of piqued my interest. And later, as I found out about human design, it kind of started to make sense of like, oh, this is why I'm the way that I am. Like my design makes sense. It's like, okay, cool. That's who I get to be. Um, but authentic relating and relationship really started maybe 12, 13 years ago. I was living in Thailand and I was in a relationship and we were struggling. I was struggling in the relationship and I bumped into a man. Um, there was a park in Chiang Mai where I lived where people used to gather on a Sunday afternoon and do acro yoga and play and hang around. So I used to go there and I would take my partner there, and she had a young son as well. And there was a guy there who really intrigued me for some reason. He wasn't like any of the others. He was wearing the five finger shoes, which I was like, oh, that's cool because they're kind of things that I've been interested in. Um, and he was really attentive to my partner's son in a way that no one else was, and so he was very interesting. And he invited me to a men's group. We ended up connecting a bit, and he invited me to a men's group. And then I later found out he was one of the founders of something called the Authentic Man program, which is pretty much non-existent anymore. but I started diving into that work, and that really introduced me into this world of authentic relating, and kind of started a fascination with that. So that kind of started, and that happened. I started learning about authentic relating originally to try and connect with my partner more deeply. We separated not that long after that. I used it to try and kind of connect with women more. That was really my focus. But I noticed that I just started using the learnings that I'd had with everyone, and I was like, oh wow, this is a really fascinating way of being. And so then I started facilitating it, and it's kind of led to this long cascade. And it's only been um, 2 years since I've been running my own kind of work, and that happened by accident. I didn't actually go, right, that's it, I'm going to become a coach and a facilitator and a teacher and everything. It was actually, I was like struggling with a little bit of health 2 years ago, and I was like, I need to make some money because I want to buy some supplements. What if I just put it out there that I'm going to run an authentic relating program? I wonder if anyone will be interested. And like, I sold out in 3 days, so I just kept going.
Wow.
It's like that program sold out, and then I was like, I'll do another one. It sold out, and I'll do another one. It sold out, and I was like, okay, this is now my work.
I love that so much. That's so awesome. I'm curious. This is just a curiosity. What were you doing
Uh-huh.
before you decided, okay, I'm gonna put this course out? Like, what were you doing? Like, how? Like, I just want to know the contrast. Like, getting into
hmm
this work.
So yeah, so it's quite interesting because it was. I'll go backwards from that point.
Hmm.
So um, I was living out of my van on a farm that I'd just come up to stay on. Um, because I actually love farming, organic farming. That's like really probably what juices me up the most. I really enjoy being in that kind of environment. Um, Before that, I was in Sydney, and I was studying two master's degrees and working for a center that was about to start a program supporting people with suicidal ideation. And
Mm.
I was studying a master's in counseling and psychotherapy and social work at the same time. And COVID hit, and I'd come out of a relationship that was really tumultuous a few months before. I was still really deeply affected by that ending, and the kind of quite traumatic way it ended for my nervous system, and figuring out my nervous system as I was in quite strong dysregulation, and COVID hit and everything. And I was like, I don't want to be in Sydney anymore. Why am I here? I was living in a share house in the inner west of Sydney,
Hmm.
and I was like, I don't want to be here anymore. So I bought a van and just was like, okay, I'm going to go find a farm. And I went up to be on a farm, and I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. I've just dropped both of my master's degrees. I have no job. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm following my impulse, and that's where it led me.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a crazy story.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
I mean, it's now telling it as well, it surprises me. I'm like, oh yeah, that is pretty wild. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
It's inspiring though, because I'm so certain that somebody's gonna be listening to this saying, okay, wow, like look where he is today. I can follow that impulse. I can follow what I feel or know is right
Mm-hmm.
for me. So that's
Mm-hmm.
awesome. Yeah. I'm conscious of the fact that some people aren't gonna know what authentic relating actually is. So
Mm-hmm.
do you want to simplify it, like explain it for us?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people might have heard of something called NVC, or nonviolent communication. It's kind of it's a communication framework for basically de-escalating or attempting to de-escalate conflict out of communication. Doesn't always work that way. Um, Authentic relating, and the reason I reference that is because to me, authentic relating is also it's a communication framework. It's a way of relating, and there are a number of schools that are teaching it in the world right now. I'm just one of them. There are two others, and we all do it approach in our own kind of unique ways, and we've kind of structured it in our own unique ways. But for me, it's really the way I break it down is it's a set of skills, um, communication skills, that some of them are about how do I listen more deeply, how do I listen, and the way I like to think of it is how do I listen in a way that allows you to be more fully who you already are. So it's like, how do I be with you and listening to you in a way that actually brings your essence out? That's the deepest desire for me in this, in the way that I teach. And then the other side is, how do I express? How do I express myself in a way that is really authentic to me, that allows me to be more of me? How do I express myself so I show up more in the world? So, and then we're doing those two things together. I'm listening and being with you in a way that allows you to be more fully you, and I'm showing up more fully as me. So now we have a more authentic world between us, right? We have a, and then the third kind of aspect of authentic relating in the way that I teach it is, how do we pay attention to what's happening between us right now? And that is about kind of consciously co-creating the relationship we're in, and not necessarily romantic partnering, all relationship. You know, authentic relating is not, it's not specific to romantic sexual partnering or relationship. It's friends, family, work colleagues. It's a way of relating. And we're really keen, you know, we're getting started. I have a team, and we're looking to how do we get these forms of relating out into the world more fully? How do we, you know, support nurses and doctors and hairdressers and teachers and, you know, everyone to like bring more of this into the world, because then we get to be more of ourselves.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's basically a set of skills that we apply to have more elegant communication or more elegant relating, and develop what I call relational intelligence. So relational intelligence is the is basically intelligence that understands what's happening relationally when I'm interacting with others.
Yeah.
Does that answer it for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that explanation. And what I'm wondering, so when you started explaining, what your vision is and like really what you're moving towards, one of the things that you mentioned was that, relationships, I don't know if these are the exact words that you use, but the relationships are really struggling. Our connections with people are really in turmoil on this earth. I want to know, like, what do you think if you had to pick one or a couple, what's the main block towards actual connection that you see?
Yeah, I think at this particular point, our particular generation, and perhaps the one just after us, I think two generations, like the children coming up now, are going to have different struggles than us, due to a bunch of stuff happening, particularly technology and everything. But for our generations who are like, you know, looking for love and looking for romance and looking for partnership and finding conflict and pain and breakups and not feeling mad and not feeling seen and not feeling heard. I mean, there's a lot of it. Like two kind of major blocks. I'm going to give you two rather than one. One is the relational piece. You know, that's what I just referenced in authentic relating. It's like we don't necessarily listen to each other properly. We don't hear each other properly, and we don't share ourselves vulnerably enough. That's one piece. But if we start kind of moving through that block and we start to learn, okay, I'm able to listen to you, I'm able to share more, the next block we come up against very quickly, the moment we start dropping into intimacy with another, is nervous system dysregulation, or what we call a trigger. And most relationships are nothing but strings of triggers and getting back together. Trigger, rupture, repair, rupture, repair, rupture, repair.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're in that kind of dynamic with a partner, it's very taxing energetically. We lose a lot of energy, and as a result, the relationship basically takes the predominant role in our entire life, while everything kind of falls down around it. And so people are like, why would I be in a relationship when that causes the rest of my life to suffer? And there's multiple layers. Part of it's nervous system dysregulation, and part of it is the tendency for us to want to enmesh, which plays out in the anxious avoidant dance, or what we call codependence. So, and I think of this really comes down to the insecure attachment system. It's like an incorrect or like an incomplete bonding map that we got given from childhood. So we don't know how to bond in a way that maintains agency or autonomy. We don't know how to navigate both our individual autonomy and independence and our communion or connection or deep intimacy. We don't know how to balance the two. And we tend to like fall from one side to the other. And as a result, create a lot of conflict. And we have that anxious avoidant dance play out. And it's really painful for a lot of people.
Yeah, I really resonate with what you said regarding relationships being just, triggers, like getting triggered and then like repairing, triggered and repair, and it being really taxing, and then like everything else falling around it. I can so resonate with that. I'm so certain that like so many people listening to this right now
And
can
and
resonate with that. Yeah.
totally. And then what happens is we get into this, like what I think of as a high friction relationship. So it's like we need a lot of friction all the time to maintain it. So the friction shows up as conflict or really passionate sex. And so we're like having the passionate sex, and it's like, yeah, it's amazing. And then we get into the conflict, and it's like, oh God, it's horrible. Then it's like, amazing, horrible, amazing, horrible. And it's like, well, the sex is so hot that I want to stay here, but the conflict is so painful that I don't want to stay here. And then we get stuck in this like twisted place of like, I don't want to leave because I'm getting like kind of my sex addiction needs met in a way, really.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But I also want to leave because it's painful, but I don't want to leave because leaving and the heartbreak of disconnecting is so painful. And if breaking up a relationship devastates us, it means that we're enmeshed. Basically, it means that we're
Mm-hmm.
operating out of our, you know, we would grieve out of finishing a relationship, no matter who we are.
Mm-hmm.
But the kind of like the chaos when we go into breaking up and the pain that happens is often because there's a lot of enmeshment and entanglement going on. So yeah, I know what you mean. I've been there as well plenty of times. And the reason why that's important for me to mention is because if we're going to create a better planet, if we're going to create a more harmonious planet where we're able to relate with our children and the earth and nature, and we're able to look after the planet in a way that's not destroying us, we need all our energy. And
Mm-hmm.
while we're consuming so much of our time and energy on relationships that aren't working, when we don't have the time to do it. Whereas for me, I think that relationships should be a place where we thrive. Relationships are what ideally make the rest of life even easier. This is a sanctuary. There's sanctity in the relationship where, like I'm actually, nourished by the fact that somebody's here and I'm not alone, and somebody's got my back and I've got their back, and together we're co-creating, and I have more energy than I would be when I'm single. But there's so few stories of that,
Uh-huh.
and we got to change that.
Yeah. Whew. I love that so much. And it's so true. And like when you were talking about like the whole being in relationship and like the back and forth and like what was going through my brain, because at the moment I'm not partnered, right? I'm single, and like
Hmm.
my cortisol levels are down. I am good. Like it's so easy to be really good when you're single, especially when you're like, building yourself up, building up your nervous system capacity, relational skill and capacity, all the things. So I'm like, when hearing you speak about that, it just reminded me of like past connections, and I'm just like, oh, like so. It's so interesting. I want to go into more. I mean, there's so many places we can go with this conversation, especially with you and all the things that you are skilled with. So I think it's important that we kind of narrow down, otherwise we'll be here forever. And
Hmm.
yeah, this will go on forever. I did really want to focus on boundaries,
Cool.
mostly because like I think a lot of the things that you talk about, it's like the way you explain it, it's different than anybody else, and it hits me different than anyone else. But with boundaries, it blew my freaking mind because I haven't
Mm,
heard it like that. I
mm,
haven't heard it like that. I haven't even finished the
mhm,
boundaries course. I'm like in 3 out of 5 right now, and I'm just taking my time with it because oh, it's
mm,
so good. And
mm,
I don't even think people really understand what boundaries are.
mhm.
I thought I knew what boundaries were until I got into that course, and I'm like, oh wow, like it. I'm like trying to tell everyone to do it, actually.
Awesome.
Um, but before we go into that, I feel like anybody who's listened to my podcast has a bit of a nervous system 101 by now. If you're tuning
Cool.
in for the first time, then let's just can you provide like a bit of a nervous system 101, how the nervous system impacts our relationships, just like a brief overview, and how Damien would explain it before we go
Mm,
into boundaries, because I think that's really important.
mm. What can you get like specific on your question of what you want, and then I'll be able to really target
mm,
it.
um I don't know, I'm trying to think. And all I've
Mm.
got is how our nervous system impacts our relationships, just like a brief
Okay.
overview, like a brief
Cool.
101 before we go into boundaries, so whatever
Yep.
comes up.
Yep. Great. Got it.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Um, I think I'll just say basically two nervous system states that occur in a relationship. There's a whole spectrum, but let's just take two extremes, and we'll just take two states, and we'll be able to see from there. The first is when we're regulated, nervous system regulation. When we're regulated, and particularly when we're co-regulated, meaning that so a regulated nervous system is when we're just calm. Regulated nervous system, you know you're regulated because you feel good, you feel happy, you feel content, life kind of feels good, you just kind of have positive feelings. That's our natural nervous system resting state. If we're not feeling that, we're not actually regulated. So the moment you start feeling unhappy, depressed, anxious, nervous, angry, scared, sad, you can feel grief and be regulated, but like sad, like as in, like, that kind of stuff, we're actually in a dysregulated state. So when we're in a regulated nervous system state with our partner, we feel good. We feel in love. Our heart feels open. That's the reason we want to get in relationship. We feel, really easy going. There's a lot of connection between us. And as a little teaser of what starts to be possible, as we continue to develop that regulation, we start to enter into being able to feel arousal, sexual arousal, turn on, feelings of love without any friction, without any intensity, meaning that arousal blossoms from the inside rather than it's like something we have to do to get turned on, rather than like something from the outside. So that's like deep regulation, deep co-regulation in a partnership is kind of that experience where our body feels turned on by the other person. Our chest will feel soft. We'll actually feel soft in our chest and open, and our belly will feel soft and open, and we'll feel like more energy kind of flows through our system. So that's one extreme of really good. And then from there, if we continue to deepen that, that's when we start having more kind of spiritual experiences. It's actually related to you can't really have them in a severely dysregulated nervous system state. Then we go on the other side and we move into dysregulation. And this is where we actually start getting, you mentioned cortisol before, we start getting flooded with stress hormones. Our body moves into kind of primitive survival mechanisms: fight, flight, freeze, fawn. There's a few other ones as well, faint, they talk about that, stuff like that. So we go into survival adaptations. And so if we're in a partnership, and when we grow up, when we're young, we get imprinted by our attachment system. Our attachment system is the way that we bond to our parent, primarily our mother, but also our father, to our primary caregivers, our primary environment around it. We start bonding to them, and we get imprinted with these little kind of scars when things happen as a child where we think we might die. For example, I'm a baby. My mother has put me in a cot in a separate room from her, right? And they've gone to bed and I'm in this cot by myself, and I wake up and I'm alone in this room, and my mum's in a complete other room. I can't even feel her, right? Think about this. You are a 6 or 8 month old child. You can't even stand up yet. And there's no one around. If a tiger walked into that room, there's nothing I could do. I might actually die. This is real. This is the child is experiencing this as, I might actually die right now. Nobody's here to protect me because I can't do anything. So the child starts screaming, right? And the only tool we have is to cry to get our mother's attention, and nothing happens. The child starts crying louder, louder, louder. Eventually the mum comes in, picks us up, soothes us, puts us back in the thing, leaves. We kind of go back to sleep. We wake up, we're alone again, start crying. Mother comes back. Okay, maybe takes us into their bedroom. We get these kind of little imprints that then start to perceive when we're an adult. And it's obviously a lot more complex. I'm doing a longer job than I probably should have. When we're adults, this will create an anxious attachment system. If the child was just left alone to cry it out, you'll have a more of an avoidant attachment system. Mm-hmm. When we're adults now, when we start to encounter intimacy, we actually get triggered into these threat responses. When the partner, if I'm more anxious and it feels like the partner's leaving in some way, an anxious person starts to throw a tantrum, right? They throw an adult tantrum. They get really hysterical. They kind of start creating drama or conflict. We're operating out of a dysregulated nervous system state. Mm-hmm. So, and the avoidant will tend to shut down. So there's a lot of mechanics to this, but essentially when we're in conflict, when we're in heightened, when you start poking at each other and you're going at each other and you're starting to criticize each other, and and or you're getting really upset, and I can get really dramatic myself sometimes, like when there's a little bit of a rupture, sometimes like I get all Cancerian and I pack up all my partner's stuff and put it in a box that she's left in my home and be like, right, that's it, like that kind of stuff. We're dysregulated. Because the moment you come back to regulation, all of it falls away and you go, oh my God, it was all made up.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so that's really how we know what dysregulation is. And the problem is when we spend too much time in a dysregulated state, we actually lose contact with the relationship itself. We're just operating out of defensive patterns. So they're really defending the perceived potential loss of intimacy. And at a deeper layer, they're actually perceiving the growing of intimacy, because intimacy has been equated inside of the brain with something scary.
Mm,
Intimacy means that I'm going to feel abandoned. So I actually want to defend myself from getting too intimate at the same time as I'm trying to create it to happen. It's really complex. And so we have to work through these barriers.
yeah, I love that. And I was laughing during it because I was like, relatable. um,
Yeah.
what's popping in for me at the moment, I'm doing a rewatch of Sex in the City.
Hmm.
And it's like a documentary for this anxious attachment dance. I mean, for those of you who've ever watched it, which I feel like is like a lot of people, especially a lot of
Hmm.
women, right? It's like when Carrie's with Big, it's like the perfect, like she's playing the role of the anxious one, he's playing the role
Yep.
of the avoidant. But then when there's
Yep.
Aiden, who I feel like Aiden at the start was like more secure. I don't know if you've watched it, Damien, but like he
I,
was like,
I I did a long time ago.
yeah,
Yeah.
like I'm watching it now through this lens. It's so
Mm,
interesting.
mm.
He's like, doing all the quote unquote right things, like, introducing her to his parents and like all the things. And then she's starting to like be the avoidant one because it's like, oh, intimacy, oh, scary, oh, better sabotage it, better like cheat on him, better like run away from him, like all of these things. So it's so interesting, like hearing all of that and then like just real life examples. And I feel like to go in a layer even deeper into like the world media, there's so many examples
Well, it's like
of
it's like
this.
it's a mythology now, right? It's so archetypal to us that it's right. I mean, you can't listen to a love song without hearing that dance in it. You
Oh,
can't watch a rom-com. You can't watch a drama. You can't watch anything without seeing it. It's there.
yeah.
It's our mythology because it's basically our greatest challenge relationally is to deal with this.
Oof.
And it's drama and it's rare that you see positive examples of like, oh, that's really secure. Oh, he did something
Really
healthy
rare.
there, Yeah.
Really rare. I feel like the only thing I could think of the top of my head is Outlander. I don't know if you've watched that,
Mm,
but
I haven't.
like it's really nice actually. They grow older together and like
Mm,
sure there's drama in the relationship but they've got each other. It's like it's actually the only thing I can think of. And I've watched a lot
mm.
of romance. I've watched a lot. I cannot think of one. So
And
yeah.
the thing is, like you said, relatable as well. It's like we almost, we connect to these things because we experience them so deeply, and it's like, okay, but then we're also continuously imprinting ourselves with what I think of
Oh,
as the matrix. There's a
yes.
relational matrix, and so when you start getting into relationship or partnership with someone, you come up against that matrix. That
Mm-hmm.
matrix starts to press itself on us, and if we're not super conscious and super mindful of the dynamics and understanding the dynamics and being able to separate ourselves from them and watch them objectively, we get
Yes.
swept up in that matrix and all of a sudden you're just playing out the drama. And
Absolutely.
every relationship is going to have to deal with that, no matter who you partner with. And then one of the great ones, and I'll stop it after this one. One of the great ones is like, oh, there's so much drama here. I somewhere out there is going to be the perfect person who I'm going to have no drama whatsoever with. And it's like, well, maybe if there's someone who you feel capable of working through it with, because we carry it inside ourselves.
Oh, yes.
Mm,
So true. Oh, thank you. Thank you for that explanation. It's so good. I think that really gives people like real life example of how
mm,
this plays out, how it impacts them for sure.
mm,
Um, yeah. So, and then the other thing I wrote down because it's something that pops into my mind all the time. I think it's in your Regulate course. You said what is it? I really love what you said about as soon as you realize that you're dysregulated, your number one job is to get regulated again. Not to try and figure things out, not to try and do this. And it's like I think back to how many times in relationship I'd need to get it figured out right then and there in the state of dysregulation, in the state of conflict. It's like, I need
Hmm.
to figure it out now. And I'd use all of my energetic resources to try and think of a solution so it would be over. It's like, okay. And even like, oh, I get a bit stressed at work, for instance. This is just a random example that's coming into my brain. Or I need to make a decision on this, but I can feel my system like not 100% right. It's like, oh, okay, Damien pops into my brain. My number one job is to get regulated.
Yeah.
So good. So
Yeah, we
valuable.
can't actually solve problems from a dysregulated state. You can't solve relational problems from there. All you do is, it's like you literally keep digging a hole. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, we're in a hole. Maybe if we keep digging it, we'll get out. It's like, no, actually stop, put down your shovel, and look up and go, oh, actually no, we need to climb out of the hole.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
good. I love it. So one of the things that can really help people, come into their center, come into their own, come into their wholeness is boundaries, right?
Hmm.
So how do I explain boundaries? I think everyone understands boundaries from their own perspective, but I feel like people get boundaries and walls very much confused. And
Yeah.
people can be like, oh, I'm putting up my boundaries, I'm putting up this, but all they're doing is pushing people away because it feels safer to do so. So I'd love if you could, explain the concept of what boundaries actually are and maybe dispel a bit of the confusion.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I think the common perception and understanding of boundaries is very immature, to be honest. I think it's not, and it's largely, yeah, like you said, an excuse to kind of create walls and be justified in being like, it's almost like an attempt to justify a lack of care or empathy for other.
Mm.
Um, so boundaries, the way that I like to explain boundaries is I like to use the analogy of a cell. And this is something that I use a lot. And a cell in our body is, every cell has a boundary. It's called a membrane, cellular membrane. Every single cell, our body is composed of trillions of cells, and they're all connected together and they're all touching. All of their membranes are touching. And those membranes are semi-permeable, meaning that things move across them. Information moves out and information moves in. Resources move out and resources move in. And that way they can pass, stuff around the body. Otherwise, there's no communication. So that's kind of how our boundary system works. It's who we are. We don't exist without a boundary system. You don't, like, none of us, like, we are a boundary system. We just have impairments to our boundary system. We have places where it's not healthy. But when a boundary is healthy, nothing enters me that I don't want to have enter me, and nothing leaves me that I don't want to have leave me, right? And so this is really challenging for people, and it's like, with compassion for the training wheels of development, when I'm actually genuinely embodying my boundaries, I never have to assert them. So an analogy I like to think about for this is like a con man, you know, and I got scammed a couple of times when I was living in Thailand by con men. Con men pick something they call narcs. They pick something that they know is, or marks, I think it is. They pick a mark. And a con man can feel someone who basically has weak boundaries, and they can take advantage of them. Someone who has strong boundaries will not take the attention of a con man. They'll go, "Oh, there's no point. There's no point in targeting that person because I'm not going to be able to manipulate them," right? That's what an embodied boundary is like. If I have an embodied boundary, you can't change my mind unless I want you to change my mind. That's an intellectual boundary. My emotions won't be affected by your emotional state. It's an emotional boundary, right? You can't manipulate me into some behavior that I choose not to. That's what it's like to have embodied boundaries. I don't have to walk around with a billboard saying, respect my boundaries and don't try and con me out of my money, right? That's not a boundary, right? That's making up for a lack of one. So a lot of the time and this is really controversial, right? A lot of the time when people say I'm asserting my boundary, we're actually using training wheels for a place where there isn't a boundary, and that's why I say it's immature. It's almost like that's what a child does. The child, and a lot of us have been impacted through our childhood, so we're actually having to kind of make up for all the stuff we didn't get a chance to do properly in childhood. We're having to do that as adults, which is really confusing, right? We act like children a lot of the time, even though we're in adult bodies, and it's like, oh, well, that's weird. So you know, that's what a child does. A child experiments with their boundaries and sees when they push too far with them, and then they eventually start to develop, and we have them. Everyone has embodied boundaries. There's places where you and you know your boundaries are generally places you don't even think about because they're just so part of you, right? So a wall, on the other hand, is a place that blocks connection. We go back to the cell. A wall could be considered like what's it called when you like frostbite, when like I forget the name that happens when you get like frostbite. There's a word for basically when the blood stops flowing to certain tissues. There's like a form of necrosis, a form of cell death.
Mm-hmm.
If information stops flowing to a cell, that cell is separate from the rest and it eventually dies, right? If that's what walls eventually do. If you're in a relationship and you keep putting up walls, eventually that relationship dies. That person stops sharing with you.
Mm-hmm.
That's them pushing away. That if you ever set a boundary that actually has the person go, well, I better not. I want to shrink back and don't want to share anything with you. That's a wall, not a boundary,
Mm-hmm.
right? A boundary doesn't have people shrink away from us. If you set a boundary with me that's genuine, if you're genuinely boundaried, I know where you are, and I don't have to shrink away from it.
Uh-huh.
On the other side, places where I don't have well-established boundaries are more like tumors, cancer, right? There's no differentiation between cells, and so they bleed into each other and create a mass of undifferentiated cell material, which is a tumor. It's cancerous,
Mm-hmm.
right? So not having boundaries or having rigid, walled-off boundaries actually create dis-ease in an organism, in a body, at the biological level, and they do it at the relational level too.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Brilliant explanation. Thank you so much. I love the cell analogy. It's so easy to visualize for me.
Yeah.
Um, so I mean, we probably touched on it already, but like you mentioned childhood, the fact that we didn't, or a lot of us didn't get the opportunity to actually form those boundaries, right? So
Hmm.
why would that be? Like, what's the difference between somebody who hasn't got well established boundaries as an adult versus the type of childhood somebody would have had if they did establish did get oh my god, my brain, if they
Hmm.
have healthy established boundaries now, what type of like different distinction of childhood would these two examples would have had? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool.
So the formation of healthy boundaries would have been the opportunity. So I think the stage, the child stage where children are really experimenting with their boundaries is around the age of 2. The terrible twos they're called often, and this is where the children start saying no a lot and pushing away. So a child who had had the opportunity to develop healthy boundaries probably would have been honored in their no's, probably would have been let know when the like or and also being let know when the no's were too forceful or not polite. Um, and they would have been given the opportunity to discover their own autonomy as they went through that process. So they would have their boundaries would have been honored and also recalibrated by the parents when they're kind of incorrect. And you also might have parents who would check, would you like this? Do you want some of this? And actually honoring the child's ability to choose and not pushing belief or dogma or anything into the child's mind, and actually allowing the child to start forming its own kind of healthy relationship to its thoughts, forming its, and then allowing it to have its emotional experience separate from the parents, not pushing the emotional experience on the child. So really really supporting the development of autonomy in
Mm,
the child's being, in the child's psyche, is what would allow, and all of us have had some of that, at least, at minimum, and then there's been different degrees of how many places in the other child where we have improperly formed boundaries would be like where we get pushed into places we don't want to go. Like, an example might be like your mother, your parents have guests over and you're feeling shy and like wanting to hide behind your mum, and it's like the mum kind of pushes you out in front of them and goes, go on, go say hello. And you're not actually ready to. So you're actually like, subtle ones like that, or like you know pushing belief patterns in, like this is how you should believe things, or you know um yeah, all kinds of stuff like that. There could be myriad examples, but they're basically ways in which that we weren't given an opportunity to feel and think for ourselves, and we were imposed upon in those places,
Mm.
would start to create just a lack of awareness. Or here's one that can happen a lot when, say, for example, a mother and the mother and father, or the father is separate and the mother then bonds with the child in replacement of the father. So that creates a lot of enmeshment, and you might have a child then who's actually got no sense of boundaries because they were never actually allowed to differentiate from their mother. Their mother was using them for intimacy needs that they should have gotten from an adult. And this can happen a lot too,
Mm.
and that can create quite strong psychological disturbances when someone gets older. Um,
Mm.
so any way that a child's autonomy is not fully honored and they're not supported, so they actually need to be supported to develop autonomy. So any way that that's impaired or imposed upon is going to create boundary ruptures.
Mm. Yeah, it's so
Yeah.
interesting. It's so like I find like so much of that relatable. I'm like,
Yeah.
when were my needs honored? Honestly, like I feel like a lot of people don't feel like as like if they were a child. Like I think it comes down to the parenting, right? It's like a generational thing of like weird parenting, just like
Well,
or
it's
no parenting.
multi-generational, really.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's like thinking back to like were my needs honored, you know? What did I even have a voice as a child, you know? Was it everything just imposed upon me? And I know for myself, a lot of it was just like this is how you behave, this is what you do. Like I don't think exposing a lot here, but I'm good. But I don't think that it's like I don't think I don't think anyone really thought about that. And then for me as an adult, it's like I have to like go through that process of oh, actually I have a need. Oh, actually it matters. Oh, actually
Mm-hmm.
like I completely just dismissed myself just then. Like I completely just didn't even look at my need and then went to what does that person need? I don't want to make that person too uncomfortable. So, you know, I better shrink my I just like automatically like repatterning that. It's like
Absolutely.
it's a ride, you know? Like
Well, and the other side can happen too, right?
yeah.
So, and one more distinction around boundaries. People often think of boundaries as what I call protection boundaries. Boundaries are the way of defending myself or moderating what comes towards me. But
Uh-huh.
there's also containment boundaries, which are moderating what comes out of me.
Uh-huh.
And this is something that's often neglected around boundaries. Is actually like, if I can be unboundaried in the way that I speak to you. I
Uh-huh.
could speak to you in a way that doesn't honor you at all, and I am actually the one with no boundaries here.
Uh-huh.
I can emotionally emote over you without whether you want it or not, and have no boundaries here. So the
Mm.
opposite can happen: a childhood where the child is given free reign to do whatever they want, say whatever they want. They're never being calibrated. And so what happens is they grow up with a lot of entitlement. They grow up not understanding other people's space. They grow up, doing whatever they want. They might, at extreme levels, they might steal. They have no orientation towards what's mine and what's yours. They don't have an understanding of those boundaries, or they just emote over people. They call up their friend, everyone has had experiences with people like who call you up and you answer the phone and then they just like basically just vomit all of their emotional stuff all over you and then go, thank you, I feel better, and leave. They've got no emotional boundaries. They're not able to actually contain what's leaving their system,
Yes.
right? Places where we force, and I can do this sometimes, I can try and force my opinion or perspective on someone else, even when they're saying, no, actually, I don't want that. And I keep going with it. This is my lack of intellectual boundaries, my lack of containing my thoughts.
Yeah. I love that so much. I forgot about that part of the course actually. It's so true.
Hmm.
It's so true. It's like how many of us have had a friend do that? Call us up. How many like
Or
it's
even
just so
done that. I've done
yeah,
that too.
and it's like it's so normal in like relating. Like it's people don't know what they don't know. So it's so interesting. Where do I want to go with that? So there's the containment boundaries and then the boundaries that are coming in, and then the different types of boundaries. So we didn't actually speak about that. Can we speak about that? The different types of boundaries? Like, because people, I don't think people think about this at all, right? People don't get
Hmm.
it. Like, so yeah, I'd love to speak about that.
Well, so yeah, so like, you know, to give a quick overview, and there's obviously lots more to them, but a quick overview is, yeah, we have our protection boundaries, which is moderating what's coming towards us. We have our containment boundaries, which is moderating what's coming out of us.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have boundaries at different dimensions of our reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I break it down to four in my course, but there's more, but I just break it down to four because I think it's otherwise it gets way too complicated, and then we start trying to intellectualize our boundaries, which is not the point. We want to embody them, not try and analyze them to death. Um, so we can have boundaries at the level of our body, our physicality, which is also our stuff and our sexuality. If I have weak protection boundaries in my sexuality, I may, for example, and this is something I know lots of people struggle with, I may let people have sex with me, especially as a woman, but I've even had this as a man. I have let people have sex with me when I'm not ready or I don't want to. And I'm not able to say no here. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
able to actually maintain my sexuality. If I have weak boundaries, containment boundaries there, I may press myself sexually onto others. And a lot of men can experience this, right? Where they actually try and impose sexually. They force their sexuality. They move sexually in a way that's not calibrated to the other person. There's no containment. Same with touch or closeness. People who stand too close to others, can have a lack of containment, or like get up in your face. They don't actually understand physical proximity. People who go in for hugs when you actually don't really want to be hugged,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, and me accepting a hug when I don't want to be hugged, So there's physical based boundaries. Then there's emotional boundaries. Is the way that we emote, the way that we experience our emotion. If I have weak protection boundaries here, this is the story of the empath, right? I go out into the world and I'm just feeling everyone's stuff, and I come home and I have to spend hours processing all the feelings. I actually have no emotional boundaries. I'm not able to discern and moderate what's coming into me. And I'm going to add another layer to this later with human design as well, because human design adds a really interesting layer to boundaries when we look at the defined and undefined centers. But that's just a little teaser bookmark. We can go even more nuanced than this. But yeah, so if I'm weak in my emotional boundaries, I'm going to be picking up everyone's stuff. I'm going to sit and have a conversation with you, and afterwards I'm going to be like, whoa, like I'm feeling all of your emotions. I wasn't able to actually differentiate myself from your emotions, so I let them in. Or if I have weak emotional containment boundaries, I'll emote over you. I'm not able to actually contain my emotions, so my emotions spill out. Like that's the kind of person you're in. I live in share houses often, and that's the person in the share house who, like, they walk in the kitchen and you just feel their emotions smack you in the face, right? It's like, oh my god, like I can't be near that person. They're just like they've got no containment with their emotional state, right? And we're learning this, and I'm not saying any of this to shame anyone, because as you spoke before and I really strongly agree with, we can repattern all of this. We can actually develop boundaries where we don't have them. We need to know what we're doing and how to do it, which is why I created a program around it. But we can repattern it and we can develop them, and then we have intellectual boundaries, or our thoughts. And I mentioned that if I have weak protection boundaries here, I'm just going to take on other people's opinions and ideas. Someone's going to say something about me and I'm going to take it on as truth. I'm going to believe everything that I read on the internet. I'm going to not be able to discern what's mine and what's someone else's. If I have weak containment boundaries at my intellectual level, I'm going to be imposing my ideas and opinions on everyone else, even when they don't want it.
Yeah.
And then the last domain I talk about is spiritual, our relationship to the divine, our kind of sovereign self. Um, Similarly, if I have weak protection boundaries here, I'm going to just take on everyone's idea around spirituality. I'm going to be like constantly lost in my orientation towards spirit or God or the universe or whatever you want to call it. And same with, if I have poor containment, I'm going to be pushing that on others. I'm going to be going around and knocking on people's doors and trying to make them convert to some spiritual idea. So that's a brief run through. Obviously, it's more nuanced and complex than that, but you know, just to give a glance that there are multiple domains to our boundary system, and it's a system. It's a boundary system that basically is a huge component of who we are, or how. It's like our boundaries are the way that we interface with reality. We interface with reality through our boundary system.
Yeah. Oh gosh, there's just so much relatability in all of that. Like, as you're talking, I'm like, how many times have I been that person? How many times have I
Hmm.
interacted with that person on like all sides, all of it, right? It's so
Hmm.
freaking relatable. I know in your boundaries course, I think I'm in module 3 out of 5 at the moment. And
Mm-hmm.
like I've just got so much gold. Like there's just the way Damien explains it, he's already given us so much. He's been so generous in this podcast in terms of explaining a lot of that. But it's all really just mapped out for you, and then you get a meditation to do about like where you're at with your boundaries now and just feeling into them. But then there's also an embodiment that you teach as well, which like I've just been, even though I'm on module 3 out of 5, I've just been like, whenever I feel like I need it, I'll do it. And then
Mm-hmm.
through the process of doing that, it's like my system, my body, mind starts to register something. And then what will happen is it's like almost like I feel more safe afterwards. You know, it's like it develops a level of safety. It's like, oh, I have boundaries. Oh, I have choice. Oh, I have agency. And like I can actually decide. And it from that, I feel like something ripples out, you know, it ripples out into the world and how I act in the world. Like somebody, I'll give you an example. I was at the cash register yesterday and somebody was like, the lady at the register was like talking to me about her problems. And I noticed where usually I'd like want to help and fix and like make it my responsibility. And I just, in that moment, I was like, oh, I actually want nothing to do with this. And
Mm-hmm.
I just said, oh, you know, I really, you know, hope you sort that out. Okay, we'll have a good day, and walked away. And that was that. I just wiped my hands clean of it. I didn't think about it until this very moment. You know, whereas before
Mm-hmm.
I could have spent an hour there thinking about ways to help her and like made it part of me. And you know, there's just so many like interactions throughout the day, so many little things that can turn into big things that we don't
Yeah.
even realize.
What I just want to, I love that example that you gave because it really demonstrates the simplicity of it, but also it's like simple, but until you get it, it's like exactly like you said, you could normally go, you might not have stood there and helped the woman out, but you might spend the next 2 hours thinking about her. Your
Yeah.
boundaries were permeable to the point where she got inside of you. And in
Mm.
this instance, you said a perfect example of an elegant embodied boundary, in my opinion, is yeah, you just said, I hope you sort that out. Have a beautiful day. There was no, oh, excuse me, you need to stop talking to me about your problems because I have a boundary around that, which is kind of how boundaries are taught that we were talking about before. I
Yeah.
need to assert my boundary here and not take your problems on. So can you please stop talking? No, actually, if I have a boundary, you just don't touch me unless I want you to touch me,
Yeah.
right? Have a beautiful day. Walk away. She doesn't feel bad. She doesn't go, what a bitch for like not letting me vent or anything. She'd go, oh, that was nice.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
I'm laughing because it's like it's so relatable, but it's so funny. Like it's actually like it's just how simple it is, but then how difficult it can be for our systems because we have this like the learned patterns from childhood, right? And then they
Exactly.
just keep rippling out and creating all this mess. When really,
Yeah.
if we, but it's more than just like our mind. It can't be like a mind and then like for anyone who's listening and like resonating and doing some of this stuff and maybe not wanting to anymore, it's like don't judge yourself for it. It's like a learned skill that you have to repattern, and it's like a whole body mind thing. It's not like you listen to this and judge yourself. So
Yeah.
just putting that out there. So I know that I'm gonna like rave on about the boundaries course, the boundaried course, and the regulate course, like to everybody who listens to this and to me in
Mm.
general in life. But for like looking, we've gone so deep into the problem. I really want to go into some solutions for people today, like you know, a few steps
Hmm.
that they can take. So you know, they've listened to this. They're like, okay, I can identify, I can see myself in some of this. Okay, maybe I can start to change this or change that, but just something to help them. Yeah.
Hmm. Well, so the way that I've set up the course and the way this works is that there's multiple layers happening at once. So the first layer is what I call, psychoactive educational material. So right now, this podcast, as you're listening to it, is psychoactive. And what that means is that if you listen to it and take it on and contemplate the ideas, it starts creating changes in perception. You start looking at the world differently. That's what psychoactive. If people present information in a way that is able to change, able to expand the way we think, that's psychoactive. And so just listening to this podcast and reflecting on these distinctions around boundaries that you may have never heard before, I'm talking to the listener right now, is what will allow cascades of change to occur. Little like nuances of like, oh, I didn't, oh, you can start seeing little glimpses of this in your life. You start contemplating on, you start reflecting on it, and that starts to create cascades of change inside of awareness. So then the second aspect is really awareness, tracking these patterns over time. Um, and in the course, the meditation practice is an example of how we use our awareness to look more deeply into our experience. And so you can do this. You can take inventory. The listener, you can take inventory and start contemplating all the places where you've understood this material, where your boundaries aren't very well defined, both in protection, the ways that you're being impacted, and containment, the way that you're impacting others. You can start observing that in your life. Go, oh, wow, I just took on that thing that person said, or, oh, wow, I just pushed that on someone else in some way. And you start just paying attention to your life. And then the last kind of one, and is that's kind of the main feature of the course, is the somatic repatterning, which is where we actually start to do the embodiment practice. So we retrain ourselves. But for the listener, these two pieces of just being aware and listening to this material, allowing it to move into you, and being aware of your boundaries out in the world will already start to create changes. Will already start to have effects.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the good news, as we've said multiple times, is we can repattern our nervous systems. Our nervous systems are called, like, some people may have heard the term neuroplasticity, or our nervous system is plastic. And what that means is that it's moldable. It's able to reshape itself.
Mm-hmm.
And basically all of the triggers and all of the poor boundaries and everything, they're not set in stone. They're not here forever. They're just habituations. They're habits of our nervous system. And they've run because our nervous system hasn't been told to do anything else. So they just keep doing it. It was set up very young and it's never learned to do anything else. So it just keeps doing it. But when we train it, and we train it through our awareness, we train it through our practice, we actually start creating changes. And at first, it can be little bit the analogy I like using when we're creating nervous system changes. We're hacking a new path through the jungle. Like, literally, there's no path there, and we're actually having to like get out there with our machete and hack our way through to create a path. And it's like, I don't know where I'm going, I don't know if this works, but after a while you move through that path, and you get from, say, the village, which is our hub of awareness, to a periphery point, which is, say, where there's a place where there's a lot of resources. We're used to going a different direction to a place where there's no longer any resources. There's a highway, but it goes to a place that's barren now. That's our triggered pathway, right? But now we're going in a new direction, and we're having to form a new path, and there's resources there. And then we walk that path again, and we can tap those resources again, and then we walk it again. And every time we walk that path, it gets more strong. The jungle backs away from it. It becomes a more solid pathway, and easier to walk, and clearer to walk, and faster to walk and move through it. And so we do that over time with our nervous system, and then we change, and that change is permanent. Like, we can actually affect permanent change on our nervous systems and our ways of being through our practice.
Yeah, that is so powerful to mention. Thank you. And I mean, like, taking it even a step further, like exactly what you were saying at the very beginning, like this is the change, like these changes are the changes that change our relationships. And then from the changing our relationships, having more capacity in our relationships, having those be a safe place, then we have capacity to make the changes that we need to make in the world. So beautiful.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Do you think there's anything major that we have missed regarding boundaries that you'd like to mention? I don't know. I have a inkling, but I can't think of something. Is there anything else?
Um, I mean, it's a big, long topic, uh, but it's also, like it's kind of encapsulated to that. Like, I've tried to refine it to, what do we need to know? How can we, like, part of my desire, in the way that I present materials, it's like, let's get it, let's strip it all the way down to the basic mechanics of it, use that understanding to rechange it, and then move on. My desire is, like, to actually move on from the idea of ever having to think about boundaries again. And when we become embodied in our boundaries, we don't have to think about them anymore. I don't have to set boundaries that are embodied. They are me. They are who I am. Um, Little teaser though, I am going to be offering a course in the next month or so, just a short masterclass course on a particular aspect of boundaries that I call standards. And
Mm.
standards are a way of being that allows me to be a stand for what I most want in a way that is non-reactive.
Uh-huh.
And I make a distinction between standards and expectations. Expectations are reactive desires for what I want in life. So they're always trying to change the other. They're trying to force the other into doing something, whereas standards are a way of being in myself, resting in myself, that allows what I desire to become more and more available to me. Um, so that's an aspect. So there's other dimensions of boundaries, but
Mhm.
as an overview, I think this was pretty solid.
Yay, awesome. I love that. And so this did you say it's a workshop on standards that you're doing?
Yeah, it'll be like a masterclass and then be sold afterwards, probably a 3 hour workshop or something, a once off.
Okay. All right, I
Yeah.
think I'm in. I think I'm in.
I'm gonna call it hashtag standards.
Really? Is that what you're really calling
Yeah.
it? I can't tell if you're joking or not.
No, I'm
Oh,
being serious.
I
I think
love
this can
it.
be fun.
I
Hashtag
love
standards,
it.
with the hashtag. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
actually really love that, and I love that whole concept because I think it's a really important piece that's missing, missing in
Hmm.
society, missing in like even for me, I'm like, do I even have that down pat? I don't think so. So no,
No, it's a work in
yeah,
progress. I don't know if you follow me on Facebook, but I just wrote a kind of a spontaneously decided to write a survey post, and people are answering in comments. I'm going to turn it into a form later
uh-huh.
about what people's their current ideal version of relationship that they want is. And I broke it down to lots of different domains. What's your spiritual desire in relationship? What's the level of polarity you desire? What's the level of form? Do you want monogamous, open, poly? With the desire to be really inclusive. And people are really enjoying the experience of answering it because it's actually the starting point for developing standards. It's a starting point for knowing, what do I want, not who you should be. And I think this is where, I used to do this as well, where you sit down and write a list. I'll write a list of all the things I want my partner to be. That's
Uh-huh.
an expectation. That's not a standard. Versus, this is how I want to have my relationship. And then I let the universe surprise me. This is how
Oh,
I want to experience.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God,
Yeah.
that's so good. I love that. I'm gonna go check it out after. I'm not on Facebook much, but I'm gonna go check it out after. And what just popped in quickly was like, I found my ex's list. Like when we were together, I found his list of everything he wanted in a partner. And I'm like, I found it. I was crushed. Like, I don't think it was just
Yeah.
like a couple things on the list. I was like, I'm not that. Oh my God, sad.
Hmm.
It's
And
like,
the
it's
problem,
so funny. Sorry, keep going.
well, exactly. But the problem with the list is we're always going to get let down.
Yeah.
And if I'm attached to the list, I'm going to be looking at my partner as a disappointment.
Oh,
Versus when I have standards, I just know what I'm not okay for, and then I don't have to disappoint anyone. I'm just like, oh, that's not the kind of relationship that I want to be in. For
right.
example, for me, I'm like, I don't want to be in a relationship where there's an unconscious, anxious, avoidant dynamic playing out. I'm okay with working through it because the reality is I'm still repatterning my nervous system.
Uh-huh.
But if I'm not okay with a partner having avoidant tendencies and not being able to own and work on them, you
Yeah.
know? And so when I started dating again, um, I would notice very quickly if a partner started displaying them, and I'd mention them. And if they got reactive and denied them, I'd be like, okay,
That's it.
that's fine for you, but that's not something I'm okay with. And then it just allows me to step away from relationships that are not going to serve me in the longer term easier.
I love
So that's an
that.
example of how we use it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that example. That's really good. I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Damien. I'm
You're
beyond
welcome.
honored to have you on here, and I know that so
It's a
many
pleasure.
people are going to get so much from this. So I'm gonna place this all in the show notes. But how can people work with you? What have you got going on, and how can people
Hmm.
find you?
So I have currently what we've been speaking about in this show. There are two evergreen programs that you can take at your own pace. One is called Boundaried. It's all around developing what I like to call elegantly embodied boundaries, which we've kind of referred to in the show. And the other one is called Regulate, which is about developing a resilient nervous system, so that we can stay in a regulated state more and more often, which starts to alleviate a lot of problems. It makes us have the opportunity to have a healthier, loving, open-hearted relationship, but it can also alleviate problems through this practice, and therapy prior to it. it's not necessarily in place of therapy, but it really supports it. And if someone has enough of an internal map to work with already, then you can use it as a solo practice. If there are real big issues to work with, I do recommend always working with somebody for at least a little bit. But if we have good tools, that level of work doesn't have to be years and years and years and years. It just doesn't have to be. So Regulate is about repatterning our nervous system for regulation. At a personal level, I struggled from pretty chronic depression most of my adult life, and through using these practices have alleviated that for the most part. That I actually completely, I can say, I have my lows from time to time, but they're not crushing. Um, so those two are evergreen on demand. There are more one-off masterclasses and workshops that are coming out. I've just finished one on human design. I did one with a mentor and colleague of mine, Fabrice. We did one called Dating by Design, where we use human design to understand kind of the tendencies and differences in our partners based on their human design, which is a great tool. I use that in my relationships. When I started dating again, I'm in partnership now, but when I was dating again, I'd always look at a prospect's human design and look at it from the lens of like, what's here, what might be possible. And we're going to continue doing a series of that, Fabrice and I. We're going to do boundaries by design, chemistry by design, decisions by design, and we may even start looking at trauma from a human trauma and codependence and attachment issues in a human design lens, because it's kind of there. It's really wild.
Wow.
Then I also teach authentic relating. The fundamentals of authentic relating is no longer a course that I'm going to be teaching, but I have trained facilitators who are teaching that. It's very, very powerful course. It's the flagship program of the work I've done. I've taught it 15 times now, sold out pretty much every single one of them, mostly word of mouth referrals because people love it. And the facilitators that are stepping in to take over are fantastic. And I highly recommend anyone to do that. And it leads into deeper work. I'm going to start teaching more advanced kind of authentic relating stuff and leave that one to my facilitators. And stay tuned, because later in the year, I am going to start a program on secure attachment. And that's going to be probably a long container, maybe a 6-month container, but a big one. And I'm really excited for that. That's something that I desire to create massive ripples of change with, gearing up for that. So that's going to be very, very, very exciting. You can go to my website, evolutionaryrelating.org, sign up for the mailing list. If you're on the mailing list, you're always going to get informed on what's going on. You can follow me on Instagram at evorelating. That is probably my least, I want to get better at Instagram. I'm just not very good at Instagram. I'm not habituated to that, but I do a lot of writing on Facebook, on my personal page, Damien Bohler. But I'm going to be shifting away from that in my more advanced writing into a platform that is going to be released. Some info about that will be released soon. So I'll do that on all the channels, but all of that and lots more coming, lots more coming. Yeah.
Awesome. I'll pop a lot of that, the Facebook, Instagram, website, all of that in the show notes. And I might jump on Facebook more so I can catch you more on there, because I'm hardly on there. I thought you were doing pretty well on Instagram, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
I feel like, yeah, I feel like I could be more active there.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Damien. It means the world. And thank you for everybody listening. Yeah.
Thanks a lot.